Hello, it's Pastor Chris. I want to thank you all again for joining us for another video devotion series. We've been taking time to go through what it means to be in Christ, who we are in Christ, and what we have in Christ, or what we are in Christ. Before I jump into today's video devotion, which is going to be talking about that in Christ you are loved. I want to remind you what it means to be in Christ. Pastor Melissa began this series of video devotions by talking about your relationship with God. I want to give you a couple of illustrations as to what that also looks like, just as a reminder and a refresher. One of the things I think about a lot of when I think about being in Christ is the illustration I saw out of Kids Church several years ago, and it was an envelope. And the envelope was Christ, and we were the letter. And it was simple. You take the letter, you put it in the envelope, and you seal it, and now the letter is in the envelope. That's what you and I are. We are in Christ like that. So when God looks at you, when God looks at me, He sees us as in Christ, as Christ being in us. Another illustration that I think about is I think about a color wheel. And really, I think of it in terms of dyeing Easter eggs, because I remember when I was a kid, you didn't buy pre-dyed eggs, and you didn't buy dyeing packages. You bought vinegar and food coloring. And a lot of times you had three colors in your food coloring: red, blue, and yellow. And you had to mix those colors to make a new color. So if you wanted green, you had to mix blue and yellow. If you wanted purple, you had to mix blue and red. If you wanted orange, you had to mix red and yellow. And a lot of times that's what I think of. I think of that I'm the red food coloring and Jesus is the yellow food coloring. And when we became in Christ, it wasn't two food colorings living side by side. It was Jesus making us into new creations, a new color, orange. And so that's what it means to be in Christ, that we're not just connected, we're united, we're enveloped in, we're mixed with Christ. And so today we want to talk about that in Christ you are loved. Now, a couple of devotions ago, Pastor Allison talked about that in Christ you are God's beloved, meaning that your relationship with Him is so deep and so real and so powerful that He looks at you as His beloved, like He cherishes you more than anything else. Now I want to talk to you and remind you that as His beloved, you are loved. God just doesn't like you. God doesn't just tolerate you. He loves you, and He loves you. This is the crazy thing. As I was thinking about this, He loves you before you ever come to Him. Romans chapter 5, verse 8. Well, let's read verse 7. Paul says, let's start at verse 6. Paul's writing to the church at Rome. He says, see, just at the right time, when you were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. I think sometimes those of us who've been serving God for a really long time, we forget that Christ didn't die for the godly. He died for the ungodly. He died for everyone. Jesus Himself said that it's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. Jesus Himself said that He came to seek and save the lost. And so at just the right time, when we were still powerless to help ourselves, Jesus died for the ungodly. And then Paul kind of accentuates this. He says, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person. That means, like, if somebody's really good, you might die for them. Though for a good person, some might possibly dare to die. And then verse 8, Paul says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So if Christ loved you that much, how much more do we as his children get to experience that love on a daily basis? At the beginning of the summer, we kicked off Mother's Day with a very powerful message by Pastor Scott Wilson and a book, Parenting with Purpose. And the whole premise is based on Matthew chapter 3, after Jesus is baptized and he comes up out of the water, and there's a voice from heaven says, "This is my son whom I love, with him I am well pleased." And we had 3 takeaways from that, which I want to give to you again as we close out today's video devotion. Number 1, you are God's child. Number 2, you don't have to do anything to make him love you. And number 3, he accepts you just as you are. In Christ, you are loved by God. Have a great week. We'll see you again real soon. God bless you today.